don't think we've done that yet. But I do think in the last 12 months, you've seen signs that we have entered that stage. Stable coins growth, acceptance from the US and the government, friendly regulation. I almost joke with my team every now and then that I think we have entered the boring stage of crypto, which is a good thing. Now I believe we have won, and now we just have to watch the score settle.
This material is for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide accounting, legal, or tax advice, or investment recommendations, or an official statement of Presto or its affiliates.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Presto Research Podcast. I'm your host, Min, joined by my colleague, Thomas, today. And we have a very special guest this week as well, Anil, co-founder of Delphi Digital. Anil, great to have you here. How are you doing today?
Hey, guys. How you doing? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. As usual, I guess let's just start with the basics. Could you give our listeners basic background of yourself and how did you get into crypto, and also how did you found it, Delphi?
Yeah, definitely. So, myself and the other co-founders of Delphi, we all came from the TradFi world. So we actually, most of us met at our first job out of college at Bloomberg, was doing more so corporate bond research there, then left Bloomberg and joined Deutsche Bank for, 2 years doing more so leverage finance. Honestly, when I was growing up, was super excited about finance and kind of the world and, viewing the world through that lens. But very quickly, as I joined, the corporate world, got very kind of disinterested, demotivated, and almost felt like, not that I was lied to or anything, but it just wasn't what I expected it to be, right? Where maybe 20% of the job was actually analyzing companies, analyzing financials, thinking about how this company could kind of change the world going forward. But 80% of the job was always understanding weird systems that these banks or Bloomberg had, and then politics with old people. Didn't really love that. And then, kind of right around that time, fell down the rabbit hole of crypto and got really excited about what building a parallel financial system would, be like, and all the opportunity and kind of all the responsibility that I think people, like ourselves and, people early to the industry, even the OGs who were there for years before, kind of had on their shoulders to kind of make that happen, right? It wasn't going to happen by itself. So yeah, my friends and I left Deutsche Bank in 2018 to start Delphi. And we really thought, both with our expertise and what the market needed, research was kind of the first place that we could kind of really add value. And so we started Delphi as a research firm back in 2018, and then, the rest is history.
So I guess Delphi started as a research firm, but now it has venture consulting and even design part, right? So can you walk us through that kind of changes, and what are some key turning points that you think led to expanding the company into different areas?
Yeah, definitely. So the Delphi that everyone knows, of today has three main, companies, right? Research, which is where, consulting and, the design consulting, I guess, is housed under. Labs, which is our incubation arm, and then ventures, which is our prop capital venture arm, right? And essentially, it started each division. There wasn't any master plan. I wish I could say that, myself and the founders, when we first started Delphi as a research firm, thought that this was going to be the path that we would end up on. But it wasn't any master plan or anything. It was really just as we researched and learned more about what holes were in the market, we figured that we could be a part of filling those holes, right? And I think venture was probably the one that was always an aspiration for us to kind of start. And I think as we started doing a lot of research and consulting in the early years, because when we first started Delphi, no one really paid us for our research. So really how we bootstrapped ourselves was doing a lot of consulting for protocols that needed kind of an, extension of their team to help with a lot of the ambitious problems we were trying to solve, right? So work hand in hand with the team at Synthetics, Aave, Lido, very early on everything from risk management to mechanism design to just go-to-market strategy, et cetera, right? And I think as we were doing that, one thing is we learned from these projects that there weren't basically any real value add investors in this space. So, they thought that it'd be awesome to have not just us aligned from, the amount that they were paying us. And sometimes we get paid in tokens, right? So you could kind of align incentives that way. But also they said, hey, it'd be great to have you aligned, not just based off the time that you're investing into our protocol, but also with money, right? And that's kind of where the idea and kind of how Delphi Ventures really started. Over time, one, because we work with so many great teams, we learned so much and had, such a great perspective into where crypto was going and where it was at. But at the same time, on the consulting side, there'd be some times where we would, go up to a team and say, hey, we think this should be a priority for you guys, or we think you should design the mechanism this way. And, maybe there was, other priorities or other fire drills going off that team couldn't necessarily like prioritize what we thought needed to be prioritized, which was like totally fine. But that's where labs kind of came out too, which, we thought, hey, we think, with all our learnings from both the research, consulting, and the venture side, we can probably design protocols in a way that, one, as researchers and consultants, we thought would like make a lot of sense, but also as investors, we would want to see built in this space, right? So each division kind of came out of almost like duty is the way that we kind of like see it internally. And I think this is a way that hopefully most builders should be thinking about the space is like, what does crypto need to succeed? And I think like that was the question we were asking ourselves every step of the way. And then obviously, we're not doing this as a charity or anything, but if you're providing something that the market or space needs, you'll probably be able to benefit off it, right? And monetize that value. So yeah, that's the way we thought about it. And, there were a lot of, funny lore and, we made mistakes. We learned a lot from that. We had a lot of successes. We learned from those too. I think like, just always being willing to like experiment and adapt is like crucial in any market, but in crypto, it's like, table stakes.
Yeah. So, I assume you guys have seen a lot of good things and bad things from the top crypto teams, while you guys are doing consulting and investing and researching. Or there some advices that you can give to the crypto teams? Like, what are some common mistakes they make in terms of designing their tokenomics or things like that? Some of the top things that comes out of your head.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say like the advice and, even the way that by consulting works with projects, which I just was able to hang out in person with the whole research and consulting leadership team last week. So have a lot of like really good insight from like how they're thinking about the space and what projects need. But like, I think one, it's always usually bespoke, and maybe the one like advice that I think it'll change based off like where the project is and what they're trying to accomplish at that given point. Cause like that changes itself very quickly, as well as the market's changing constantly. But there's two ways I look at it. One is, and we can kind of go back and forth on arguing whether or not the token is a product. But I think obviously the token is very, very important to, and if you choose to do a token, you don't have to do a token, right? And funny enough, even though we're known as like the token design guys or whatever, very often our advice to teams when they come to us about like exploring a token is like, don't do it yet, right? Like if you have a lot of white space to grow without, adding a token in the mix, which, I think a lot of teams view tokens as an asset, but they should be viewed as a liability, right? Where now you have a responsibility to kind of drive value to that token, have like a community that owns that token and wants it to go up. You have a lot of stresses that come with that, etc. So like, I think if you do decide to go down that path, then you have to realize that the token is now part of the product, if not the product itself, right? And I think when you go down that path, the benefit of having a token is like, it obviously can be not just a very strong bootstrapping mechanism, but it can kind of be like a fuel on the fire, right? So like if you are trying to achieve something very ambitious, one thing that crypto is really good at that, Web2 had like not a hard time figuring out, but like, how to raise a lot of VC money to kind of like bootstrap growth and like use subsidies to do that. But crypto, you can raise very little money and do a boost program or a token, and for better or for worse, people within crypto will give your product a try. So if it's a good product, it will like, will hopefully have a flywheel that will kind of like suck those people in and become sticky users and have like good retention, right? If your product's shit, then people are just going to farm the token, and then once the token's airdrops, they're just going to leave, right? So knowing that and kind of like using that is very important. And then the other part is like if the token's well designed and the product's well designed, then hopefully this is like a sustainable kind of like fuel in the flywheel, right? That kind of keeps it going and kind of like presents like a floor of where like not just hopefully the token should be, but like where your product's usage and kind of like maybe the volume or whatever it's doing it can be, right? So I'd say that like if you choose to go down the token path, just know that the token is now a big part of the product, right? Whether you like it or not.
I don't know if you have any names on your mind, but if you pick like a one or two projects that you think has a really good design, what would it be?
Yeah, so obviously, we come from like TradFi and obviously spend a lot of time in DeFi. I think like DeFi is kind of like very like a very good product to like have these flywheels kind of develop very quickly. Obviously, I think like, you know, everyone and their moms is talking about like hype. They've obviously designed not just you know, a great token, but they designed a really great product. And I think like that's why the token's done so well, right? I think like even you know, maybe like a hotter take is like I think the pump.fun token is really interesting as well too, right? Obviously, I think one benefit that hype did that's different, and this is like a really good thing to like think about from a communication standpoint, is hype basically had these buybacks almost programmatic from day one. Pump basically, you know, was a little bit all over the place, right? There were rumors when they came out that it was 25%. Now it looks like it's 100%. And if you, you know, and the market right now is like basically pricing in risk that they're going to change this again, or that they're not believing this right now. So I think Pump's token model can kind of like be fixed if they either do one of two things. One is like be programmatic with their buys. So if they put it in code that's saying, hey, up until, you know, at least a certain date, if they don't want to commit forever, but like say for at least a year or 2 years, whatever, we're buying 100% of this token. All of a sudden, I think the market immediately re-rates this thing much higher. Two, I think as time passes on, and all of a sudden, you know, they have this great dashboard. Obviously, there's a lot of dashboards on Dune, on Crypto Twitter, etc., that you can see how much they're buying back. And, you know, for the past week, it looks like they bought back, you know, basically $12 million of their supply, because they have, you know, whether or not people like their product, it's a product that the market wants, right? It's a product that people are paying for. So like, I don't think, you know, all these people who have hot takes and say, hey, you know, should we want Pump to exist? Should we want Pump to exist, etc.? Like, it doesn't matter. The market is clearly telling you that it wants it to exist, right? Like, otherwise they wouldn't have made $12 million last week. And of that 12 million, they spent all 12 million to buy back the token, right? And if you kind of analyze that just based off the volumes last week, that means that they're buying over 50% of their circulating supply in the next 12 months. So I think, you know, for a token that is buying over 50% of their circulating supply, that token should probably be higher. So I think that is like a design. Obviously, right now, you know, not that you're in this revenue meta, but I think one thing that I'm very kind of excited about is that people are actually caring about revenues. And it's not just because they are now caring about revenues, it's because these revenues are now becoming monsters. Like they're hard to ignore, right? They can actually demand very high valuations. So now all of a sudden, I think it's not just that the market's like, oh, like I think, you know, since we got into this space and, you know, you can go back and read early reports, we were always interested about revenues, whether it was from synthetics, Aave, you know, Lido, etc., right? But like nowadays, because you have these protocols like Hype and Pump and Athena, right, that are just making, you know, hand over fist cash, it's just hard to ignore, and it can demand very high valuations, which usually crypto always plays a very big premium on assets, even if they were making revenue. So it kind of made no sense to make revenues, because like if you had a revenue, it would set a very low ceiling relative to like what you could get if you had a very good story or narrative, right? So yeah, those are just some examples, but like yeah, I think it's also just like a sign of the times, which is a great thing.
Just that you mentioned Pump.fun, this is a very random question, but do you have any thoughts on Heaven Dex that just launched last week?
The what?
The Heaven Dex. Have you ever? It's like a new launch pad that was launched like last week, but they're buying back 100% of their fees. So
Awesome.
it's kind of getting pretty hot.
Nice. Yeah.
Right
Damn,
now.
you're gonna have to send me this afterwards. No, I was not aware of that.
Okay.
I thought Mina was going to ask about the Palm.fun kind of a disaster recent news about it, but yeah, let's pass on that one.
I guess then it's like kind of good timing to hear your thoughts on, is there any like a current trend or theme that you're bullish on, or maybe something that you actually think might be overrated, either bullish or bearish?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you know, we have big Athena bags, and like we've been close with that team for a while now. And I do think that like, you know, to be honest, I think not that we were wrong by any means for the time being. It was just the market wasn't giving them credit for, I think, what Guy and the team had kind of like accomplished for, you know, maybe the first half of this year. That token was kind of like, you know, it looked pretty held down, honestly. And I was surprised that it was so low for a while. Now, obviously, with, you know, their DAT stablecoin X, which I think is very well designed, as well as just like, you know, their integrations that have, you know, helped USDE supply kind of balloon very quickly, right? It passed over 10 bills just last week. I think Athena is in like a really, really awesome and interesting spot. And I think like they have they have like the killer product, right? Like obviously this cycle, stable coins have been something that's like on everyone's lips, especially with the Circle IPO, right? What's cool about it is I think Athena is basically doing the same amount of revenues as Circle, and Circle is valued at like, 35 bill, and Athena is basically valued at like, 10% of that essentially, right? Actually probably more now with the run up, right? But still like probably less than a quarter, right? So I think like that's very that's very interesting for sure. I also think the integrations that Guy has gotten has just been like insane to see, right? Like being able to use USDE and have a stable coin on say an exchange like Bybit and earn yield while using it as collateral is like a killer integration. Like I don't think he gets enough credit for that, as well as his like partnership with BlackRock, which like, I think Circle right now has been valued crazy because like people are just excited to get stablecoin exposure and everything like that. The truth of the matter is like, the Fed is going to cut rates. I don't know if that's this or next month, but like it will eventually cut rates, right? And as soon as that happens, Circle's revenues dive off the cliff, right? But I think what's amazing about Athena is if that happens, funding could get very hot again, and all of a sudden the USDE's yield can kind of go crazy too, right? So I think Athena is always an interesting one and probably one of the cooler products I've seen designed in a while, right? So that's been one of my favorites. One I like the overrated question. Because obviously crypto is really good at overrating stuff, but I think right now, like where attention is, it's like for a good reason. So like other than like, hype is obviously like, I would never say hype is overrated. I think it's like the killer product. And I think that team, 11-person team led by Jeff is like doing it, like it's just like creating the playbook of like how you can build kind of like a community oriented protocol. So I wouldn't say hype is overrated. Obviously wouldn't say stablecoins are overrated. I think that's like the killer product of crypto. I think like prediction markets are obviously very hot right now, but I think like I'm excited about almost like the V2 of prediction markets where that you can kind of get more long tail kind of like markets created, whether it's via bond anchors like a pumped off on mechanism, right, or something like that could be interesting. I guess what else? I think privacy is like underrated. So like I recently angeled into this protocol called Vanish, which is has a partnership with Axiom, which allows people to like go into Vanish mode. And on Solana, if you're using something like an Axiom or something like that, or just like generally on chain, you can get copy traded very easily, and everything like that, right? And I think like something like a Vanish makes a lot of sense where you can kind of pay a small fee and protect that. I think the demand for that could be massive. So yeah, I think like maybe underrated is privacy, but I think at the same time, privacy has never been historically like a great investment, right? It's almost like a public good, but I think how Vanish is designed to be more so like sit on the front end and be this toggle that people pay fees to for each transaction makes a lot of sense and could be like a privacy protocol that ends up making a lot of money. Yeah.
Let's talk more about your consulting part of business. So what do you, as the crypto industry matures, what kind of institutional grade support do you think your firm can provide to the upcoming projects?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it's funny because we've almost went full circle here. So when we first started, we were obviously like the only projects that wanted to pay us for consulting were like crypto native projects, like DeFi projects, like Synthetics, Aave Lido, like I said many times. We designed Axie Infinity, for example. So like very crypto native teams. But I think in that 2021 bull cycle when like, Elon was talking about Doge on SNL and everything like that, that's when our consulting division went in a different direction for a little bit. And we were working with like big firms and big corporate firms, like going into BlackRock to do presentations and all this stuff. And, talking to big brands and talking to big artists, right? And I think, we actually, the one takeaway that we had from that was like, we hated working with, big corporate firms. Like they just take so much more time, and like crypto native projects, you can kind of move much faster. If you work with the big corporate firm, you're in the last cycle, at least in 2021, most of them just wanted pilot programs so they could be able to say they were working on crypto stuff. And then you would have to hop on like a call every 2 weeks. And like, it would take 4 months to close something at least. And then like, it would be a very small pilot program where like in those 4 months, we probably would have helped out like, 5+ crypto projects like extensively, and they'd actually ship something out that we would help design. Right. So it was insane to see like how much work it would take to do a pilot that no one would really hear about, or there'd be like one headline about, versus, just like actually working hand in hand with the crypto team and actually ship stuff. That was our favorite. So really we've come full circle, to answer your question, which is like really leaned very hard into working with crypto native projects, right? We have a few right now that maybe, depending on when this goes out, I can name like, talking to Luca and working with Pudgy a lot right now, working with Kraken on some cool things, working with Plasma. And I think all of these engagements are really interesting to us because like, one, they're projects and teams that we would want to work with for free. like we would transparently would want to like, digest and kind of like, learn from those teams regardless of if we were working on consulting, right? And I think what's cool is through consulting, we basically, from our standpoint, most of these teams, even the most seasoned teams, have maybe launched a token once or twice before max, right? And hopefully not more than that, because then that's probably not the best signal, right? But realistically, most of these teams have probably never launched a token before. And I think for us, what our team's like really good at is we've been doing this for 7 years. So we've helped with, dozens, if not over 100 plus, projects coming to market. And so, to answer your question earlier, I think like one, like, is there a specific right answer for every token? Like, no, like it's very bespoke and it depends on not just what the product is building, where the product is at, where the product is launching, what types of users the product wants, but it also depends on where the market is. And all these things are constantly changing. So there's no like cookie cutter, I think, type of engagement you can kind of like offer these teams. That being said, I think like what we've gotten really good at is like, we can immediately direct the teams away from like all these wrong answers that we know like have not worked out and like should not be worth wasting their time on. And by doing that, you can kind of like, have a much like less, less choices for what the correct path is. And then that's where we spend a lot of our time, right? So I say the two buckets that, again, this is very fresh in my head because Ashwath, our head of consulting, was just, in New York last week. And we spent a lot of time talking about this because, they've seen an insane amount of demand, which I think is very bullish for the space as a whole, because I think like a lot of great teams are coming to market. But like the two ways that he sees it are like the two buckets that he kind of like really thinks about it now is applied research and economic design. What does applied research mean? It means like understanding the story that the project is trying to tell and where they're at. And, to be honest, this is like where he likes working with projects on a smaller engagement first, mostly to like get their foot in the door and almost like have both teams prove themselves to each other, right? So like know that you like working with each other, know that on the consulting side, we're not just getting, money paid, but like ideally we're getting insights and kind of like learning from that team. That's a huge thing that I think like Ashwath and the team want. Like they want to be learning when they're doing consulting. They don't want to just be like, feeding knowledge back to the team. And I think that's like one part of the applied research. And then the cool part about it is after that kind of like 1 month or, 5 to 6 week engagement, whatever it is, it's usually pretty short, usually less than 2 to 3 months. They will have a much better idea of where the project is. So rather than like come with a big statement of work or SOW for like a year-long retainer where like you're just kind of like hearing what the project thinks they need help with and then like saying, hey, this is what we're gonna, work on. The cool part about it is after this 1 or whatever 2 month engagement, they actually have a much better idea where the project is, and they may know better than the project what the project needs, right? And that's what they'll kind of like put up as a SOW and say, hey, now that we worked with you for a month or two, we actually think these are the types of things that you actually need help on, and this is what we want to help on and become an extension of your team. And I think what's cool about this process, and he gave me the stat, which is like insane to think about, but like he's been doing this type of process for 2 years now, essentially. And for the 2 years, any project that we've done this like applied research, like one short-term engagement with, they've always come back to us and said, we want a retainer. And maybe the team, our consulting team, may not want to work with certain teams afterwards because we're like, hey, actually, we don't like working with you guys or something like that. It's something that he said. But the cool part is like, he's basically got an 100% success rate from like the other side, right? Like these teams always kind of like, or now like, hey, now we see how Delphi can really move the needle. We think it makes a lot of sense. Please come in and help us with this. So yeah, I think like to summarize, like it's very bespoke, but I think like, the two things we really look for are, one, is this a product and team that can kind of like move the needle for crypto as a whole? And then two, how can we kind of get involved and help that happen? So that's the way, you know, we think about it. And yeah, it's been going, you know, really well. And I think like we work with a lot of like really great teams. You know, I've been working with Sui really closely for a while. I think they've been crushing their ecosystem. And I think that's like another way we think about it too, which is like, and I know I've kind of gone on for a while, but this is like the last part I'd say. It's like ecosystem development is, I think, super important, where, you know, a bunch of people on our team are obviously very bullish Solana. If we help the next 5 projects that launch on Solana, we don't really move the culture or needle for Solana that much, right? Like we can hopefully increase the probability and size of success for the projects that we help. But like Solana is like, you know, has their culture set out and everything like that. They've been doing a great job there, right? But, you know, for, you know, a new chain like Sui or a new ecosystem like, say, like a Monad or Mega ETH that's coming in, I think those are ecosystems that we can really move the needle for, where if we work with the first 5 projects that launch on Sui or Monad or Mega ETH or whatever, all of a sudden, I think we can kind of like increase not just the probability and size of success for those projects, but you can kind of like set a culture and set some type of DNA for those ecosystems, and hopefully increase the probability of those ecosystems success, right? So that is another, you know, vertical that I think is like growing very big at Delphi, but like, you know, is where we, you know, I think we're pickier on all sides, but like obviously if you're spending time on 5 projects in a specific ecosystem, you want to be bullish on that ecosystem, right? So Sui was like a natural one that I think early last year we were like, hey, this is one that we want to take a bet on, because like at the end of the day, the way that we view consulting is like it's another venture arm of Delphi, where instead of investing capital, we're investing time. So it's more of a scarce resource anyway. So we have to be very kind of selective with where we invest that time.
This is actually a side question, but you know how we actually hear this from the projects a lot, but these days a lot of projects are finding it very hard to raise funds from venture capital. It seems like investors have turned more conservative in terms of investing. Is this what you're also observing in the market? Also, if you think so, then do you think this will stay, or is this just some phase that we're just passing by?
Yeah, I can kind of see that. Like, I don't think it'll stay for sure. I think you'll probably already see this kind of like turn slowly and surely. I think certain sectors, like, you know, we were big gaming investors, for example. We still have a lot of gaming exposure, to be honest. Maybe someone would say maybe even too much, right? I think we really did back teams that we kind of believed in there. And I think some of those teams are going to deliver some great products. You know, when? I don't know. Hopefully soon, right? But I'd say like obviously raising for a game nowadays is probably very hard, right? Relative to maybe how easy it was maybe 2 to 3 years ago. So I think it'll be in pockets and sectors. I'm sure for, you know, if it's a good stablecoin project or a good prediction market or a good take on a prediction market, you're probably going to be able to find some type of capital out there, right? But I think the product hopefully should be good enough where, you know, people do want to take a bets on it. Because the other thing is like starting a new stablecoin project right now, even though it's a huge market and has a lot of like excitement over it, you know, crypto has a hard job of building moats, you know, like, and we've seen kind of capital being very fluid. But like at the same time, I think like, you know, going back to like an Athena example, I think it's going to be very hard to kind of like compete with an Athena or start a new type of Athena today because of all the integrations that Guy and the team have kind of put forward, right? So, you know, even though stablecoins are hot, would I think that like, you know, a new type of delta neutral stablecoin design kind of like gets, you know, filled up immediately? I think it gets filled up by some investors, but, you know, because they'll take that bet, because like even if it's you know, power law, right? Like you don't expect all of your investments to kind of go up, but you know, you want to take investments that you think can be like 100,000 X's or whatever, right? And so I think it will be filled up by some investors, but I do think they'll have a harder time than maybe a year or 2 years ago. But I do think this stuff comes in cycles. I think if you're a good team, you're a good builder, you're kind of like thinking about the product in the right way, and you're building it for the right reasons, I think like you will be able to find investors that believe in you, right? So I think just like have to get good at storytelling, and like, you know, to be a good storyteller, I think you actually have to believe the story. So I think like those go hand in hand.
I guess kind of wrapping up a bit, when you first started Delphi in 2018, I expect you didn't expect Delphi to be working on, I guess, research, venture, design, and all over the place. So I guess, what do you think? What does like success look for Delphi in the next 5 years? Like, which area? Do you have any specific areas that you guys want to focus on, or what would the next 5 years of Delphi would look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd say like there's maybe 2-part answer to this. One is like, you know, another thing that we've been working on and we just launched recently is this whole new like AI division, right? Delphi Intelligence. Essentially, like we got super deep in this crypto AI intersection about 2 years ago at this point. And to be honest, I think we have a really good team to like have like theses and everything like that. But I think what we did really well was like find really solid teams that, regardless of where value accrues in AI, they will figure out some way, shape, or form to take their best shot at, capturing that value by delivering a great product that actually serves some need, right? And I think from that and from the network that team, the teams that we invested in built, like the deeper we got into AI, the more we realized that this was like obviously something that not only we should not ignore, but something that we had to be, a part of and get as deep as possible, as we could. Because like, to be honest, even with spending 2 years in that intersection, I'd say our edge in AI is basically very close to zero, right? Like, and I think that's an important thing to like know where you have edge and where you don't have edge. And I think like last year, myself and the founder sat around in a room during our leadership retreat, and we were just like, we have no edge in AI, and 12, 24, 36 months from now, we don't want to be sitting in a room and saying we have zero edge in AI. We want to change that. So what are the steps we need to take to change that? So one, we built a team in SF in China. Two, we started this, big Delphi intelligence research brand, which, anyone can go to delphiintelligence.io. It's all free. You can read there. There's a bunch of reports already on there, and our team is dropping reports every week. And again, it's all pure AI. So it's not just in the crypto AI intersection, it's just pure AI. But I think it's very important to start building knowledge there, because like, I do think these two industries, and not just these two industries, I think like every industry will converge over time in different ways, right? There's going to be a lot of overlap with, industries integrating AI, and there's also going to be a lot of industries integrating crypto. And I think like, just like when the internet happened, and people were like, oh, you're an internet company, like 20 years later, it would feel dumb to call any company an internet company, right? Like every company is an internet company in some way, shape, or form. I think you're going to see a lot of the same things happen, not just in AI, but in crypto, and definitely in that intersection as well, right? And so for us, we feel like we're very deep on the crypto side already, as deep as you can get, I think. And I think like we wanted to do the same thing in AI. And I think, it's going to take time, but that's something that we're starting right now. Now, back to your question on like, what does success look like for Delphi? The reason why we start these divisions, again, the way that I see it is like out of duty. And I think like, one is, as we kind of got deep in that AI space, one thing we realized was the best people in AI really did not take crypto seriously at all. And I think that is something that our industry was at a detriment, at a disadvantage for, right? And that's why we wanted to kind of bridge this gap, so we could kind of get very deep in AI and then bring those learnings to crypto, apply it not just to our portcos, but our consulting clients, our incubations, our design clients, and things like that. I think that is like the way we see it. And I think like when you say what does success look like in 5 years, like it's not really just a Delphi story. I think like, I think at Delphi we've obviously done, like more well than I would have expected or hoped. Obviously, and I think like as you reach each milestone of success, you kind of like set your sights on something much higher, right? So obviously we have much higher goals than maybe what we did when we first got started. But I do think that like, because we've done so well for, ourselves and hopefully the team at large is the goal. But like, I just want to make sure that crypto happens, right? Like, and I just want, the vision that we kind of like, why we got so excited and built Delphi, because we thought crypto would kind of permeate like and become like embedded in the social fabric of like everyday life. I don't think we've done that yet. But I do think in the last 12 months, you've seen signs that we have entered that stage, right? Stable coins growth, acceptance from, the US and the government, friendlier regulations. I almost joke with my team every now and then that I think we have entered the boring stage of crypto, which is a good thing. Like we've kind of like, now I believe we have won, and now we just have to like watch the score settle, right? And I think Delphi's part in that is just making sure the score set, we score as high as possible, not as Delphi, but as an industry.
This is just a personal, I guess, because we are Presto research firm, and even for Presto research, we have Presto, which does the prop trading for part, and that's where our main revenue comes from. But I guess, do you think research company itself, just by the research, will be pretty much a sustainable business model, or do you think this kind of thing will change, or what do you think about like research companies in crypto?
Yeah, I think, and you can kind of like see parallels in TradFi, right? Where a lot of research firms or sell side research is more so like a loss leader for other parts of the business, right? Almost as a marketing expense.
Mm.
You can kind of see parallels like that in crypto. I'd say on our side, especially like pre-FTX, like this business, the research side, just the subscription side was, very, very, very profitable. We're still profitable today, right? Just on the research side, but obviously consulting is where a bulk of the revenue comes from and like really moves the needle. I do think this is something that like, we constantly are asking ourselves internally too. I do think the research subscription is something that like has a lot of benefits, not just monetarily, right? Like it holds you accountable to kind of like put out research content and look at things and in directions that maybe the market as a whole isn't looking at, right? And I think that in itself is a huge benefit. I think like right now, what I've seen is like, yes, a research subscription can be profitable, but like I think the ceiling of how profitable a research org a subscription can be is like the ceiling is not, not as high as you'd want it to build like a crazy scalable business, which is like the benefit of building a research subscription is like, your costs are the same if you're serving, 10,000 readers or 100,000 readers, basically, right? It doesn't go up that much, which, on the consulting side of the business, obviously it is way less scalable. Although the way we scale that is by like making it more of an investment fund and taking like, getting aligned with the tokens and projects that we kind of like, invest our time into. On the research side, though, I do think the hardest part, and I think the next generation of research firms, and something that we think about a lot, probably won't look like your typical research firms historically. Because to be honest, we write a lot of long form research, and I know the projects and builders and certain investors really fucking love it. And, I think that's the thing that we really work, and the research team at Delphi works really hard for, because like we do get amazing feedback from people who do read our reports. The truth of the matter is people just don't like reading long form research. So like, it's been crazy because like, I think when we first started Delphi, there wasn't that much research like being, published. Two, there were way less tokens in the market. And then three, because TikTok wasn't invented yet, I think attention spans were way, way, way bigger. And, in the 7 years since we started Delphi as a research firm, everything has kind of like folded into itself, right? So now there is way more people writing research, both research firms, but also way more people on Twitter putting out great work. Then two, I think, and by the way, that adds to the noise. So there's more noise than ever for sure. So that's a benefit of having a research subscription. But two, there's, the amount of tokens has gone up by like, 1,000,000%, right? If not more. And then three, because the TikTok attention spans have gone way down too. So that has created for like a very bad kind of like backdrop for long form research. And to be honest, we, partner with Mirror Network, who's like a great like, AI crypto protocol. And they basically helped us build an Oracle at Delphi, essentially like a model that is just trained off our research. And then basically in every report, when we write, a 30 or 40-minute report, which now, by the way, like our head of research Cedrus has like basically, all this year, our reports mostly are been around a 15 to 20-minute read, which we found to be the sweet spot. But in a 30, 40-minute report, or even a 20-minute report, you can kind of like go in and click this Oracle, and you can both, it'll summarize it for you, or you can just ask it questions, explain like I'm 5, or hey, like what takeaway should I have from this? Or hey, I'm a builder of a protocol. Is there anything in this report that I should be learning about, right? And it's pretty funny. It's been the most successful feature launch in Delphi history on the research side, which is bad, right? Because it's cannibalized our research. Like more and more people are just using that rather than reading the whole report, which like we laugh about, where like this is a very successful product launch, feature launch, but like it's, cannibalized the long form research. But I do think, to that point, the people who do read the long form research will end up getting way more alpha, way more insights, and becoming way smarter because they are doing the thing that other people find friction in, right? So I think there'll always be a place. And yeah, I think like, as a consumer or as a user, I think like people should, people should be reading long form research. And I think like, for your listeners and your viewers, obviously you probably have a great audience that is like very research focused. If they, don't already subscribe to Delphi or anything like that, feel free to, tell them to DM me on Twitter, and I will like gift them some reports, so they can, hopefully read. And I love giving people in reports that aren't members because one, like I think our research team works really hard on these content and these reports, but two, if people are willing to read it, and I think it's a great gift, right? And otherwise it's just a PDF that sits on their computer and they don't read it. That's like, that's their own fault, but they had the opportunity to.
Thanks, Anil, for sharing your insight, and thank you everyone for listening. See you all next week. Bye.
Appreciate it. Bye.